Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. There are three phases to the game. While most people focus on the two big ones, which are offense and defense, the third phase might be the most important of them all. Special teams can make or break a team. Just ask the 2010 San Diego Chargers, who infamously missed the postseason despite having the number one offense and the number one defense in the league because their special teams was god-awful. Special teams can impact field position. They can be directly responsible for scoring and not scoring. There's a reason why Bill Belichick, one of the greatest coaches of all time, continuously raves about this phase of the game. Its importance cannot be understated. Unfortunately, it seemed like Chuck Noll didn't get the memo. Noll is one of the greatest coaches of all time, and that goes without saying. He won 4 Super Bowls, he led one of the greatest dynasties in the history of the sport, and he turned the Steelers from a laughingstock to a league-wide powerhouse. But while he valued offense and especially valued defense, he did not seem to value special teams a whole lot. And in 1985, that resulted in a bitter feud between him and kicker Gary Anderson, where Anderson called out Noll for not caring, and Noll clapped back. Anderson publicly called out Noll for not knowing what he was doing, and it led to what may have been the downfall of the Steelers that year. This is the story behind the drama of the 1985 Steelers between Gary Anderson and Chuck Noll. Before I talk about the incident itself, we need some context leading up to the moment, because as you'll find out, this was not just a sudden outburst by Anderson. This was a problem that had been slowly building up, and the incident was the straw that broke the camel's back. Our story begins in 1982, when the Pittsburgh Steelers first acquired South African kicker Gary Anderson. After Anderson was released by the Bills despite a strong preseason, the Steelers swooped in and got him, and immediately, he became one of the top kickers in all of football. As we would later find out, he would become one of the greatest kickers of all time. He was on multiple All-Decade teams, made 4 Pro Bowls, and wound up playing all the way until 2004. When Anderson started out in 1982, he went 10 for 12, finishing 4th in the entire league in field goal percentage, and 2nd in the AFC, only behind Rich Karlis of the Denver Broncos. If those numbers for total attempts seem low, remember that 1982 was the 9-game strike-shortened season. He followed that up in 1983 by hitting 87.1% of his kicks, finishing 2nd in the entire NFL, and making the first Pro Bowl of his career. And after another season in 1984 where he finished inside the top 10, he led the league in field goals made in 1985 for the first and only time in his career, and he received a 2nd Pro Bowl nomination. By this point in 1985, Anderson was one of the best kickers in all of football, and because of his strong and consistent leg, he helped the Steelers make it to the postseason 3 times in his first 3 seasons. In 1985, coming off of the heels of their 3rd straight playoff appearance, and a somewhat surprising appearance to the AFC Championship, Pittsburgh was looking to keep their momentum going. The good news was that through 11 weeks, they looked like one of the best teams in the AFC on paper. They had a point differential of 61, which was 2nd best in the AFC behind the New York Jets. They had a defense that had only allowed 188 points, which was the 4th fewest in the conference. And they had won 3 straight games and were sitting at 1st place in the AFC Central. You would think based off everything I just told you that their record would be 8-3 or something along those lines. The bad news was that despite all those statistics, they were only 6-5. Why was their record so pedestrian? Because their special teams unit, particularly their coverage unit, was really bad. And as Anderson and company were about to find out, it was about to get a whole lot worse. That takes us to November 24th, 1985. It's a home game at Three Rivers Stadium against Washington in what is a critical game for both teams. Both Washington and Pittsburgh sit at 6-5, and there is a massive difference in the playoff picture between being 7-5 and 6-6. Pittsburgh was already coming into this game behind the 8 ball, as starting quarterback David Woodley, who was only starting at the time because the first stringer Mark Malone was hurt, was really sick and couldn't go. This meant that Scott Campbell, the team's 7th round pick from the draft in 1984, was getting his first ever start, and didn't know about it until 1 hour before game time. And if that wasn't bad enough, when Pittsburgh kicked off to start the game, Ken Jenkins returned at 95 yards. Washington scored a touchdown a few plays later due to the great field position, starting off in a goal-to-go situation. And they led 7-0 after just 1 minute of action. That wouldn't be the last big return by Jenkins, as he had another return of 42 yards later in the day, and another one of 30 yards. When the game ended, not only did Washington win 30-23, never trailing at any point in the contest, but Jenkins set a kickoff return average of an absurdly high 55.7 yards. Keep in mind, Jenkins was cut by Detroit before the season started. His average on kickoff returns entering this game was only 21 yards. He had never taken one to the house, and he was a fairly pedestrian return man. But in this game, he went off. Special teams was a major reason why the Steelers lost this game. And the following week, it would cost them another one. December 1st, 1985. Another home game at Three Rivers Stadium against the Denver Broncos. While it's a big game for Denver, who sits at 8-4 and tied for first in the AFC West with the LA Raiders, it's an even bigger game for Pittsburgh, who is 6-6 and pretty much needs to win to keep their playoff hopes alive in the absolutely putrid AFC Central. After trailing 17-9 in the fourth quarter, Pittsburgh mounts a furious comeback. David Woodley, now back from illness, hits Lewis Lips for a 31-yard touchdown to cut it to a 1-point game. And then on the ensuing drive, Mike Merriweather intercepts John Elway, takes it 35 yards to the house for a pick six, and gives Pittsburgh a 23-17 lead with just under 5 minutes left in the game. Things are looking great for Pittsburgh. All they have to do is prevent Denver from getting a touchdown and they are golden. Unfortunately, this isn't the way to start the drive. Vance Johnson returns at 39 yards, setting the Broncos up near midfield. It was a complete collapse and breakdown once again by the special teams unit. Elway took advantage of the field position, mounted one of his signature fourth quarter comeback drives, and the Broncos won 31-23 thanks to 2 scores in the final 2 minutes. From a 6-5 start atop the AFC Central, the Steelers were now 6-7, below 500 and on the verge of being eliminated from playoff contention entirely. And while many Steelers were upset and angry about this, perhaps none were as furious as Gary Anderson, who lashed out at Chuck Noll. Before talking about the comments that Anderson made after the Broncos loss, I should note that Anderson did make some comments after the Washington loss the week before. When asked about the play of the special teams unit that week, he said that something's got to change, because they're not very good on special teams, and that it's probably too late to change anything now this late in the season. While Anderson criticized the ambition of his teammates and his coaches, saying that he didn't think the team set high enough goals on special teams, he didn't go after Noll directly, saying, "I just try to do my job." 1 week later, though, his mantra changed completely. He spared no punches in the post-game press conference following the Denver loss, which was set up by another big return allowed. Why was he furious at Noll in particular? Because Noll was also the special teams coordinator. Whereas a lot of teams, including Washington, had a special teams coordinator, Noll decided himself that he would perform this duty, and it resulted in Pittsburgh barely practicing special teams. Anderson talked about what most teams do, which is punt teams on Tuesday, punt returns on Wednesday, kickoffs on Thursday, and kickoff returns on Friday. They go over special teams and the specific assignments over the course of the entire week, and spend hours practicing this important phase of the game. With Pittsburgh under Chuck Noll, however, all they did was go over special teams on Saturday for 45 minutes. They barely practiced special teams at all, and Anderson was not only fed up about this, but was fed up about the fact that in his eyes, Noll didn't seem to care about this phase of the game at all. When Noll spoke about this, he came up with excuse after excuse. Noll said that part of the reason why the kickoff coverage wasn't good was because he was using injured players on it. Anderson was livid about that comment, saying that that is never a good excuse. He said if they're banged up, they should not be out there, or if they're banged up, they just gotta dig a little deeper. Noll also said that there wasn't enough time to devote to special teams except the day before the game, as the other phases were more important. Once again, Anderson was furious about these remarks, saying that the other teams have found time to do it, that there's a reason that other teams are better, and that if we don't have enough time to go over special teams, what that is saying is special teams are not important. This isn't the first time that Anderson criticized Noll in this department, as he made a comment similar to that during training camp in 1984. But this was the atomic bomb. Anderson didn't stop there, though. He continued, saying that the stats speak for themselves, and that the Steelers were not only the worst return unit in the league, but that they were more than 2 yards a return worse. What's crazy is that Anderson was wrong about this stat, but that's because they were even worse than that. Pittsburgh allowed 27 yards per return, and that was before this game against Denver. The second worst team was 3.5 yards worse, with that being the Houston Oilers at 23.6. He also somewhat noted that the game might be passing Noll by, saying in the old days, when the Steelers were winning their Super Bowls, the offense and defense were so good that if the special teams were just average, that was good enough. But it doesn't seem like we have that caliber of team. Anderson was begging Noll, just begging him, to care about special teams. Noll didn't listen, and now it might have just completely cost Pittsburgh a shot at the postseason. How did Noll respond to this scathing criticism by Anderson? How did Noll react to arguably the best kicker in football completely ripping him apart and tearing apart his coaching methods? As you might expect, yeah, not too well. Chuck Noll was guiding a team that had lost 2 straight games because of poor special teams play, and had the worst return coverage unit in the entire NFL by a comfortable margin. After what seemed like some incredibly valid and constructive criticism by Anderson, Noll had a chance to change things, realized he probably screwed up by spreading himself too thin, and to assure Anderson and his teammates that something was going to change. Yeah, he decided not to do that. The following day, Noll spoke to the press and addressed the remarks made by Anderson, and basically said that he wasn't going to change anything that he was doing. He talked about the importance of tackling, and then went after his kicker Gary Anderson, saying anyone that's on the kickoff team can help by penetrating and making tackles or doing what they have to do. If anybody doesn't work on that, it's probably Gary. He stays out of the tackling drills. Noll added that there are different ways to do special teams, that this is the way the Steelers do it, and that it's worked for a long time. And regarding the practice time complaint, he said you can only prepare for so much, and you can only get so many people ready. It's kind of amazing that this is coming from Chuck Noll. Noll, as mentioned earlier, is one of the greatest masterminds in the history of the sport. And here he is, throwing his hands in the air, refusing to change and saying there's nothing he can do about poor special teams play, while basically saying that this phase of the game is completely unimportant, even though it directly cost them the last 2 games. The following week, the Steelers played the Chargers on a Sunday night. On Pittsburgh's very first drive of the game, they were forced to punt. And sure enough, the punt gets blocked. The Chargers recover, they score a touchdown later on, and wind up winning the game. If there was ever a moment in NFL history to play the Curb Your Enthusiasm music, Noll's comments immediately followed by this punt block on the very first special teams play after those comments were made is as good a time as ever. The Steelers finished 7-9, missing the postseason for the first time since 1981, and finishing with a losing record for the first time since 1971. Noll would not hire a special teams coordinator after the season, though he would eventually hire one in 1987. And the season was completely derailed because of poor special teams play. The next time anyone tells you that special teams are not important, look at what happened with the 1985 Steelers. The stats show that they should have been one of the better teams in the AFC, and should have made the postseason, especially with how bad the AFC Central was that year. The win-loss column, on the other hand, tells a completely different story. And it's all because Chuck Noll, for some reason, decided not to care about what might be the most important phase of the game. Be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JarroGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.